All right, so why are we here? Why are we here? A lot of places we could be tonight. Why are we here? We talk all the time at our church about our path. Our mission statement is really simple. It's to help people find and follow Christ, which typically leads to the question, okay, that sounds good. Like, what's my next step? What does that look like? And so it looks like a lot of things. This is not a comprehensive look at it, but these are 4 very catalytic steps on our journey that we're all on together of finding and following Christ. And we talk about connecting in a mission group. A huge percentage of our church are in mission groups. We talk about serving on a mission team, and a whole bunch of people have decided to do that in the last 3 weeks, which is great. We have a couple hundred people that are serving on teams. We talk about giving financially. It's very straightforward. We fully believe that Jesus doesn't just want your wallet. What he wants is your heart. And somehow those 2 things are connected. And so we talk about giving financially. The last part is we talk about living. And live is something that can be very nebulous. Like, what does that mean? And what do you do as a church to help me live? Well, what live means and what we mean by that is we really believe that we've been called by God to live lives that can really just see our influence that God has given us move forward in huge ways. We believe God has called us as a church to live lives that impact those that we work with, those that live on our street, those that you go to school with. And so when we talk about live, what we mean by that is we have a dream that all of us would live on mission, that we would have lives that partner with our God who is on mission and has been on mission since the beginning. And so as we've thought about this for a while, we've thought, okay, what can we do then as a church to help us towards that end? What can we do? What can we offer to help all of us live a life of more impact together? And so that's why we created this. This is Mission U. It'll happen 6 times a year. This is the second ever of Mission U. So thanks for being here. And I can already tell a number of you here were here for the last one. So 2 for 2 out of the gate. Great job with that. So that's why we're here. That's what Mission U is for. So when you get in your car tonight, my hope, my prayer, the huge win will be not only that you've met some new people perhaps, not only that you enjoyed yourself, but that you feel more equipped to live a life of more impact, okay? So as we've been thinking about who our faculty could be, and what I mean by that, in essence, who are some of my friends that we can hang out with and I can ask a lot of questions to, and they can just help us think about these things and perhaps in a fresh way. I thought of Mike Guiliano, and Dr. Mike Guiliano has become a friend over the last year and a half. He's the head soccer coach at Wheaton, and that's first how I kind of categorize him as surely he's just kind of a sports guy like myself. And so we got a coffee, and I realized within about 5 minutes that I think he cares about soccer, but he cares about other things like way much more than soccer. Soccer happens to be his main vehicle on how he really impacts a lot of young people's lives. And we've had some incredible conversations over the last year and a half as we've sat at Starbucks about all kinds of things within life. And 2 things specifically, and this is what we're going to talk about tonight. Each Mission U topic will be different, but tonight we're going to look at 2 different things. They're connected, but they're 2 different things. The first thing that we're going to look at tonight is conflict. Conflict, all right? I have plenty of conflict in my life. I have a wonderful marriage. But there's conflict in my marriage too, all right? I'm normal, just like you. So what do we do with conflict? And so as we've been hanging out, he's shared a lot of things with me about conflict. And what does it look like to have, an understanding on how to deal with this? So he's going to talk about conflict. You guys are going to talk a little bit about it around your table. And then we're going to do that for about half the night. Then we're going to take a right-hand turn. And we're going to talk about not just, this is like the relationships you have right now. We're going to take a right-hand turn, and we're going to talk about, all right, how do we relate to people that we're not like in a friendship or relationship with yet that believe very different things than we believe? How do we relate with people that vote differently than we vote or you vote, that live in a different neighborhood, that believe very different things than you do or I do? And we've had a lot of conversation around that to the point where I'm like, oh my gosh, like you have to come talk to our people about this. So, Mission U community, let's give a huge warm welcome to Dr. Mike Guiliano. All right. Thanks, man. Welcome. Thank you. All right. And if you get hungry, my daughter, who was helping set up, left her Cheerio on the table. So that's compliments of Mission U right there. All right. First question. Relationships are messy, right? Right. Quite messy. They're not easy. Relational conflict is something you have studied for much of your life. Share with us some key things that you've taught, that you've discovered around the subject matter of relational conflict.
Okay, well, I think the best way to do that is to quickly tell you my story of how I started to teach conflict resolution. I actually got a PhD, and I'm sure when you hear this subject, you're going to wish that you all had a chance to study this. Argumentation theory. That was my PhD.
From DeVry?
From DeVry, yes. Yeah. And
that was a joke.
Yeah. My reason for doing so was because I really had thought that myself and a lot of other believers I knew, we were just not very good at arguing for truth. So I said, I'm going to create an army of young people that will argue passionately and effectively for truth. And off I went to teach. I started teaching in Santa Barbara, California. Yes, I actually voluntarily left Santa Barbara for Chicago, which means I'm certifiably insane. But yes. I started to teach argumentation and debate and things like that. And things were happening good. Things were happening in terms of students were learning how to better effectively argue, but they were actually becoming more obnoxious than ever. We know people like that, right? People that just want to out-argue you. And I remember reading somewhere that nobody ever converted to Christianity because they lost an argument. And I began to get really frustrated about what the end game was for most of my students. And so at that point, I got a chance to start looking at a completely different field, the field of conflict resolution, which at the time was a somewhat new field in terms of study. And so I started to learn about that and started to teach about that, and was so excited about the results, was so excited about what the students were experiencing, that I thought, I got to do this elsewhere. I got to do this outside the classroom setting. And so I started to go to different places and say, hey, can I talk here? Can I talk to our church, for example, about conflict resolution and some of those things? And at the time, we just started going to Calvary Chapel of Santa Barbara. And we were there, my family's interracial, and it was one of the only diverse churches in town, which is the main reason we were going there. And so the pastor said, sure, come to talk to our elders. Tell us what you have in mind. And my idea was simply to give a general conflict resolution seminar, so to speak. And so I'm in talking to the elders, and one of these elders raises his hand, and he goes, you know what? I'm sensing something. A little scary to me, but he goes, I'm sensing something. I'm sensing you're supposed to give a conflict resolution marriage seminar to our church. God's telling me that right now. Now, that was not really my faith tradition, the idea that God would tell him something that I'm supposed to do, but, oh well, he was. So I agreed, somewhat reluctantly at first, but got excited about it. I figured, hey, I'm a soccer coach / teacher. Is anyone going to be there that Saturday? It was a Saturday, 6 hours together. And I got there was 100 or so couples there. And I think to tell you what I think is important about conflict resolution, I need to tell you how I started it. And this is, I've shared this before, but I normally share a video with it, but I'm just going to have to explain the video to you. So I get up, they're in a good mood, they're drinking coffee, they're having a good time together. And I say, okay, well, I'm Mike Guiliano, let's get started. And I turn around and I face the screen. And I put on a video that every time I've talked about conflict anywhere, I start with this video. And so I put on this video, everybody's out there having a good time. We're going to be together for about 4 or 5, 6 hours, and off we go. So I turn around and I turn my back to the audience, and I start watching this video with them. Now let me just describe it to you. The first man in the video looks at this family and says, late at night on Saturday night, I took your son out, and we cut off his hands, and before he bled out, we took turns burning him with our cigarettes before he died. And then another one, even more gruesome, talks about we took out your daughter and we raped her, and then we killed her and put her in the trash heap to be burned up. And so they tell a number of stories like this. So just picture this: you're out there, you're in a good mood a few moments ago. I'm sitting looking at the screen, and I turn around, and there's 100 people looking at me like, who in the world are you, and what have we gotten into? What kind of marriage conflict resolution seminar would that be? And I told him, I said, let me tell you why I start here. I have to believe that some of you are here and your marriages are really good. You're in good shape. This is maybe just a checkup. And then I would guess that some of you are here and you're having some rough times, but for the most part, you're going to make it. But I told him that I thought that there had to at least be some people out in the audience where maybe this was it. Mm-hmm. They'd come to the end of their belief that things could ever work out. And I told him, what you just saw is something from South Africa called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where at the end of apartheid, after all of this violence, civil war violence, they had to decide what to do with the people who had committed the violence. And they decided if you would face the families of the victims that you hurt and tell them specifically and exactly what you did to their loved ones, you would be pardoned. And so for 3 hours, they tell these stories. And by the way, next time you're in a really, you're in a good mood and it's just too much and you just need to depress down a little bit, I have the videos. You can borrow them anytime. So for 3 hours, you watch this video and it's just story after story like that. But then you get to the 4th hour. And in the 4th hour, you start to see some stories that are absolutely incredible, at least they were to me, where some of these stories, after a number of months and years, these people come to understand each other a little bit more. And to my amazement, some of them actually come to forgive those that did these horrible crimes to their loved ones. And then it gets really crazy at that point. Towards the very end of this documentary, it actually shows that they come to become friends and embrace the very people that did all these atrocious things. And it's an incredibly compelling moment to watch. And so I looked out at the marriage seminar people, and I said, so why would I do that? Because I would think if you're in that situation, what you need to know the most is don't ever say, but you don't know my husband, but you don't know my wife, but you don't know my boss, but you don't know my brother. You don't know them if you really think that I could be a peacemaker in this situation, that we can ever get past it. Because I said, if it can happen there, if the atrocities you saw can actually lead one day to friendships and reconciliation and relationship, then you and I should never, ever say that, but you don't know so-and-so. And I start everywhere. And, most conflict resolution, those of us who talk about this, we have a lot of techniques to talk about. But it seems to me that if we don't start with this absolute sense, in fact, if you were taking notes, it would be the first and most important principle would be people and the positions they hold can change, including you. And so the change may not happen in the other person, the change may happen in you. But until you're captured with that, then none of the other stuff's going to work. So the next week, I'm sitting in that church, and this lady taps me on the shoulder, and she goes, hey, are you that conflict guy? I guess I've been called worse things, so I said, yeah. And she goes, I believe you. She started crying. She goes, I believe you. I don't know how it could possibly be that my husband will ever change or I will be able to accept the way that he is. But if it happened there, I believe you. And so we started there, and that started the journey to talk about that. We talked about a number of principles, but that was the beginning of it in terms of what I think all of us need to be captured by. And let's be honest, most of us probably have people in our lives that we have a hard time believing are ever going to change. I mean, I do. It would be my father, who's since passed away, but back before he passed away, I have a hard time believing that. We have people in our lives that we believe it's almost impossible they're ever going to change. But that's why in the class and in some of the seminars, I spend so much time saying, look at these incredible reconciliation stories. They're incredible. So none of us should ever say, but you don't know my ex-boyfriend. You don't know my wife. You don't know my husband.
And so you're talking to them. How long did this seminar go? Was it just one day, or was it over the course of many days?
It was one day. It was about 4. I don't remember, to be honest. It was a long time ago.
Okay.
4 or 5 hours or so.
So you start by completely freaking them out, and you get their attention. And then you move to tangible, practical, I'm sure, like some things that they can get their hands around, some handles on around conflict resolution. What are some of those things? Like, what are some of the main things? I mean, take a free shot at us. A number of people in this room fall into those categories that you described. Some here, their marriage is on the rocks. Some here, they have intense conflict right now with a brother, with a boss. So what are some of those principles that I know you have that can kind of help us continue to move forward?
Yeah, well, we do 5 hours of those. I won't do 5 hours of those, but we do talk about once we're sort of committed to the belief that we want to be peacemakers. And how cool is it if you think about it, whether it's in our relationships, in marriage, or some other place, how simple and how cool is it that God says, blessed are the peacemakers, for they'll be called the children of God. I can't imagine any label that I would want to have that would be better than being called the children of God. And so we talk about some of the things specifically, practically, that you can do if you're interested in better relationships with marital spouses or with others in your life that have difficult situations. I'll just share a couple of them. I remind the students that difficult conversations, or the people that are there, difficult conversations are more about the people involved than they are about the issues that they address. One of the things we talk about is for example, that's really big in conflict is face theory. Face theory is this body of literature that says that you and I care more about what people think of us than we possibly imagine. And so if we're going to really do peacemaking well and we're going to do conflict resolution well, we have to think about who else is, at least in our heads, in the conversation. Because those people have to be answered just as much as the person you're actually talking to. Am I allowed to ask questions?
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question. So I'm a soccer coach. Maybe there's some other coaches in the room. What is the subject matter that is the source of conflict that coaches have more than any other? Not referees, that would be that for some, but what would be the subject matter, do you think, of with your players, that would be the major topic of conflict between a player and a coach? Yes? Playing time, absolutely. So you're now the men or women's soccer coach at Wheaton College, and a player's coming in to talk about playing time. And you would think, if you haven't thought it through, you would think that this is between you and him. But the fact is, there's a lot of other people in his head as well. There's a lot of other people you're talking to, whether you realize it or not, because face theory tells us we care so much about what other people think about us. Too much, actually, I would argue, from a biblical perspective. So who would those people be? For example, who would some of the people possibly in his head be that he's thinking about as he's talking to you about playing time? What's that? His parents, absolutely. Man, I sent you to Wheaton, I'm paying all this money, and you're sitting on the bench all the time. Who else? Prospective girlfriend. Yeah, a girlfriend or prospective. Exactly. Performance-based men, and we expect that, we want guys to, we want to be successful. Absolutely. Anybody else?
Other players.
Yeah, other players, definitely players. I don't know why coach isn't playing you. And so if we're going to do conflict resolution well, I remind people that we have to think about who else is in the conversation, because it's never just about two people. And so we talk a lot about what it means to think who else is in the conversation. One other quick example, gender. We've probably figured out by now that men and women argue differently. And
I don't know what you're talking about.
Maybe that's not true at Mission. Maybe that's true
At least
other
not
places.
in my experience.
So I got to ask this. I actually get a chance to talk about this the other day at a inner city charter school in the city in Chicago. And I asked them this question, and I'll tell you in a moment with some of their answers. They were unique, to say the least. But I got to ask, safe free zone, if you're here with your spouse, please, spouses, let them be honest and safe. So gentlemen only, how do women argue? When it comes to difficult conversations with women, what are the things? I can't see you very well, so you're going to have to just shout it out. Say, yes, there you go. I saw a quick hand. Silence. All right. What else?
Crying.
What's that?
Crying.
Okay.
Crying.
Crying. What else? Emotionally. That's right. As opposed to us rational men. Exactly. Yes. That's right. Okay. All right, ladies. What about you? How do men tend to be, in terms of habitually, in terms of the way they deal with difficult conversations? They avoid them. All right. What else? Silence. We got silence on both sides. Anybody else?
Kelly, put your hand down.
Yeah.
Not the first.
Here's the point. In so many areas, we tend to want to think that people should be just like us. But people aren't just like us. And we have to appreciate and respect that we argue differently. The research says, for example, how we deal with eye contact is different. My men, first of all, we don't listen as well. We probably figured that out by now. But other times, we don't need to make eye contact as much to be paying attention. So I'll be talking to my wife, or she'll be talking to me. I'll be looking out the window. I don't know why, but I'm looking out the window. So why aren't you listening to me? Well, I am listening to you. But it doesn't look that way, because for her to be paying attention means that you're going to give eye contact and some of those things. So we talk about what gender looks like. I hope this is okay, but I shared this once with a group of students, and a female student came up and gave me a list that she said I should share with any group that I talk to. Can I do it? It's a really short list. Can I do that real quick? She said, these are words women use, but men don't know what they mean. So if you're offended, ladies, if you're offended, it's not my list. It was given to me by a female student. She says this, a woman says the word fine. This is the word women use to end an argument when they are right and you need to shut up. She said, if a woman uses the phrase 5 minutes, if she's getting dressed, this means half an hour. 5 minutes is only 5 minutes if you have just been given 5 more minutes to watch the game before helping around the house. If a woman says, I'll just give a couple more. If a woman says the word nothing, this is the calm before the storm. This means something and you better be on your toes. Arguments that begin with nothing usually end in fine. All right, 2 more. Woman has a loud sigh. This is actually a word, but it is a nonverbal statement often misunderstood by men. A loud sigh means that she thinks you're an idiot and wonders why she's wasting her time standing here arguing with you about nothing. And finally, if a woman says, that's okay, this is one of the most dangerous statements a woman can make to a man. That's okay means she wants to think long and hard before deciding how and when she'll pay you back for your mistake. But she's right. Men and women argue and talk differently. So if we're going to take seriously being peacemakers, we need to understand the different ways that people do conflict.
So FaceTime. That's a huge one. So thinking about, all right, when I'm in this conflict with someone else, you're having, okay, it's one of your players. So are you personally thinking about the other people that person's thinking about?
I try to. There's part of it is I got to get out of that first 5 minutes. I don't know about you, but most of the stupid things I've said in arguments happen in the first 30 seconds. I hear someone say something to me in the first minute or so. So one of the things, and I know this is really common, I think even Michael Scott on The Office suggested this. That doesn't really help my case here, but one of the things I suggest is when you're in a difficult conversation, the first 3 words out of your mouth should be "help me understand." Okay. Should be "help me understand." And I can say, if Barbara were here, maybe she is, maybe she would have had to come in late, but if we certainly have our share of conflicts, but when we remember to start with there, it's incredibly powerful. Because at the one hand, we want to truly understand before we try to be understood. You've heard that before. On the other hand, it buys time, because I say stupid things when I don't buy time. And help me understand gives me that opportunity. I was reading in Gary Chapman's book, he was actually suggesting, apparently they did some study, I don't know how you do this study, but he said that 80%, for married couples, 80% of the criticisms you receive in any one week came from your spouse. That's a lot of criticisms. And he suggested, in fact, for many of us, it's too many, and that's why we sort of zone out. And he suggested that we actually, we do a 2-week plan, that every weekend we meet once on the weekend, and so it's every 2 weeks for each person, and one of the 2 has the right to say, here's some things I'd love to ask you to work on. And he says what you find out is most of the things you've been storing up over the week aren't that big, and you don't really need to talk about them anyway. But when you get time and perspective away from when it first happened, I love the, speak when you're angry and you'll make the best speech you ever regret. I mean, I love that phrase. It's just so true. So that's another one.
All right, before we throw it, we're going to throw it in 2 minutes to have roundtable discussion, and I'm going to ask them what are some of the biggest principles that they need to start applying. So we've got FaceTime. So give me your, David Letterman style, top 5 list.
People in the position they hold can change. I think do we come into conflicts thinking that's the case? Difficult conversations are more about the people than they are about the issues. I would say what I just said, all difficult conversations start on the balcony. Go to the balcony is a real common phrase in conflict resolution. It means you've got to get time from when the conflict first begins to when you actually respond. So that's why help me understand.
All right, hold on. So go to the balcony. That is, a conflict happens.
You come to me and you say, by the way, Mike, you did an awful job the other night when you were Mission U, and I want to say, well, it's because you asked bad questions, It's the first few moments of that.
So go to the balcony
means get away.
Don't react.
Yes.
Get away from it. Go for a walk. Settle down.
Yeah. And then if I had 5, you asked for 5, I'd say that the next one would be cultivate the illusion of the first time. Cultivate the illusion of the first time.
Explain that.
There's a lot of authors that have talked about if we could just work hard to remember what it was like the first time we met someone, or what it was like the first time we experienced something, we would see life differently. And so...
Cultivate the illusion of the first time.
It's actually a phrase. The illusion of the first time is a phrase that is used. So one of the things I invite my students to think about doing, in fact, I'll give you one quick example. is to write a memory letter. So this would be probably not for your spouses. This would be for someone that you're estranged with and you're not reconciled with, but you want to be, but they don't want to be. I had a young lady in a class raised by her grandmother, got engaged. The grandmother said, "You break it off or I'll never speak to you again." And she's in class and she's bawling her eyes out. This is the second week of class, and she's bawling her eyes out. And we hadn't actually talked about this yet, but I said, I don't know what to say other than, can I make one possible suggestion? And that is, consider writing a memory letter. And the memory letter for her said something like this. It said, "Grandma, obviously we're in a rough place right now, but I remember when we weren't there." And she said, "I remember when I was 4 years old and you took me to the rodeo." I guess they were big into rodeo, and I got on the little calf and I fell over and skinned my knee. And I remember she shared some 2 or 3 stories she remembered from those days. And she said, "I don't know how it's going to take us to get back to this place, but I think someday we can get back there." In this particular case, it had an incredibly happy story. The grandma called, bawling her eyes out, and said, "I just thought nobody was good enough for my little girl." But she cultivated the illusion the first time. And then if I give one more, it'd be the secret to disarming any difficult conversation is surprise. And I spend almost a month of the class talking about that. And most of us have probably either seen the film, the musical, but you think about the first scene in Les Miserables.
We just went and saw that in the movies.
And you think about the first 5 minutes, and I know for some of us love the film or the musical, and some of us not so much, but I was in the loving category of it. But you think about the idea when he says, so this man says that you gave him this silverware. And he says, "Yes, but why didn't you take the candlesticks?" And I think metaphorically that serves that even researchers show over and over again, what does it mean to say something unexpected and risky? That's when conversations tend to take right or left turns towards peace, is when we say something unexpected and often risky. I'll give you a quick example. I was watching a mediation, a very painful mediation. And the first guy he was already in tears before he began. He said, "Oh, well, to make a long story short," and the mediator interrupted him. He said, "I'm sorry to interrupt you because there's no interruptions allowed." He goes, "I apologize if I gave you the impression I wanted to hear the short version. I wanted to hear everything you have to say about the subject." And immediately, the tone in the conversation changed completely. So in the longer versions of this, we talk about how many times can you and I, in difficult conversation with spouses or others, say just the phrase, "I agree." There's no conflict we're ever in that the phrase, "I agree," can't come up. I'm personally pro-life. I was talking to a member from the National Organization for Women. We were having a pretty engaging conversation, and it hit me. I said, "You know something? I realized just something just now. We both agree on something really, really basic. We both really want no more unwanted pregnancies. That's still a dream. Now, how we get there, we feel very differently about. Just the words, 'I agree,' we don't expect to hear them in difficult conversations, or 'I appreciate.' Just saying those words change the trajectory because they're surprising and they're disarming. So cultivate the illusion the first time, and then 5, secret of disarming difficult conversations is surprise.
All right. So part of Mission U is for you guys to also connect with people around your table, begin processing what you just heard. Here's the first table discussion question. We'll pull this up on the screen. Of the tools Mike just shared, and he shared a number of them, which of those are most relevant to you and the conflict you are experiencing right now? In the rare case that you are not experiencing any conflict right now, all right, kind of just jog your memory perhaps on something that you've experienced. So share around your table which of these 5 tools hit you the hardest, and kind of share like why that hit you, why that stood out. All right, go. All right, let's start wrapping up. Wrap it up. Land the plane. Definitely continue the conversation later tonight. Put a comma on it. All right, not a period. Continue the conversation. Just a couple thoughts. Give us a quick little summary again. Everything you just said. Give us the name of that book, and there's something being handed out too as we're going. So tell us what that is.
Yeah. You know, John asked during that time. You know, we were talking about it, and this is new for you as a church, but it's also new for me. I either do this in a 4-hour seminar or I do it in a 15-week course. And I was saying, John, I feel a little frustrated. You know, I don't know what to pick and choose when I'm doing just, 15, 20 minutes on that. But for what it's worth, if anything you heard you would like more information on or just want to talk about. Some of you might think I look familiar. Some might think I'm a reprobate member of this church because even though my family attends church in the city, we have a lot of emotional connection to this church. So since we live in the suburbs, we can't always go to there, and so we come here. And I have a lot of emotional connection to what's happening in Mission and what you're doing here. So all of these, of course, are things normally we unpack a lot more fully and a lot more completely. On the surprise, we take almost, like I said, close to a month to talk about what are the specific things you and I do that help people to be surprised by the direction the conversation is going. So John said I should probably mention a couple of books that Gary Chapman, The Marriage You've Always Wanted. I think he has a lot of great ideas that come right out of here because Gary Chapman, The Marriage You've Always Wanted. And I think because, for example, he talks about the 20-minute rule. He says, maybe you can't wait every 2 weeks to share your criticisms of each other. That's okay, but have a 20-minute rule. That your rule when your wife says, honey, you're a slob, is you got 20 minutes before you can respond to that. And most of the wrong things you would say, the things you'd be sorry for later, would be gone.
Thank you. I'm going to the balcony.
Yes, going to the
I'll
balcony.
be back in 20 minutes.
Yeah, so again, this is normally a lot of weeks, and I'll have to learn how to do this. But I think that the whole starting point is the belief that there's no hopeless situations. Mm-hmm. One of the things I show them is you and I we tend to be slaves in our culture to the word realistic. Realistic tends to be a positively connotated word. I would suggest when it comes to difficult conversation and conflict, it's a negatively connotated word because it believes that the way things are and the way things should be are the same. And that's just clearly not the case. And we spend, like I said, the first 2 weeks looking at situations like that. So none of my students can say, see, well, yeah, but you don't know my ex-boyfriend. He's really a mess. Really? He cut your hands off and, no. There's no situation completely hopeless. I want to remind you in that first part, though, we also talked about the change may not happen in the person you're talking about. The change may happen in you. It may happen in the way that you approach things. And I think that Chapman's book does a good job about that as well. I'd wrap it up, John, and almost a downer is I guess you guys talked about forgiveness in your first Mission U, but I just want to say one quick thing about this. And I'm not quite sure what this means. You're the pastor, so maybe you'll need to go on and explain all of this, but this relational health is a really big deal for us as believers. I don't know what this means. What if it means what it says it means? Matthew 6. For if you forgive other people when they sin against you, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you don't forgive others their sins, your Father will not forgive your sins. I'm not exactly sure what that means. Maybe it means exactly what it says, but it sure makes this idea of us finding ways to reconcile with our wives and reconcile with our husbands and our brothers and our sisters and our friends. It makes it a big deal because forgiveness, of course, is the heart of all of that. So anyway, if any of this captured your interest and you'd like to know more, I'm right down the street at Wheaton. I'm at your church probably once every 5 weeks or so. I'd love to write to me, write to John, write to me, and I'll come and do the whole 15 weeks for you. That would really be weird, but maybe we do that. So if there's anything that you would like to discuss more about that, I'd love to do that.
Anything about what was handed out that they need to know? Is it pretty straightforward?
This is what we're about to talk about is what I initially talked to John to discuss. But he was especially interested if we talk more generally about conflict. And what you have in front of you is just a couple of things about marital conflict. When I do the marriage and conflict seminars, we begin with those questions, if you can see there. And then on the other side, what does it mean to cultivate the illusion of the first time in a marriage? Because I'm going to suspect those of us that are really struggling with our wives or vice versa, you didn't feel that way. We didn't feel that way when we first met them. And maybe just being reminded a bit about that might help us have a little more passion and desire to reconcile and to forgive. So that's just something for you. We're not going to talk about it anymore, but again, if there's anything I've said in my 10-minute version that you'd like to know more about, I'd love to help if I could.
Yeah, you can send any emails, info@wearemission.com. I'll make sure that gets sent over to Mike. So if you're looking for a way to maybe ask another pertinent question about that, don't hesitate to shoot that email tonight, and we'll get that answered as quickly as we can. So I mentioned that we're going to talk first about conflict, and we're going to take a little bit of a right-hand turn. It is connected, but it is a little bit different, which is how do we relate with people that believe things that are totally different than what we believe. So these are, chances are, people you don't even know yet. How do you really relate with someone that might vote way different than you do or live in a different place and so on? So that's where we're headed now for a little bit of time. Let's start with this question, though. You've been in the classroom for 25 years. 25 years. You've probably given a few lectures.
4 or 5.
4 or 5. What was the most interesting time in the classroom? What has stood out above everything else in 25 years?
Yeah, there's no question. I know what my answer is going to be to that, but to tell you that, I got to tell you a little bit of the backstory, a little bit as well. I was out in Santa Barbara teaching at Westmont College, coaching and teaching at Westmont College in the Communications Studies Department. And our president got up one day and he said something that at the risk of sounding cliche, literally changed my life, at least my professional life and my personal life in projection, because he got up and he said the following claim: "The scandal of the modern church is the way we talk to those outside the community of faith." The scandal of the modern church, he said, is the way we talk to those outside the community of faith. Now, I thought of all sorts of other possible scandals, but I had never considered that as possibly the benchmark scandal of the church. And I began to explore that a little bit. Remember, I was teaching argumentation. I started to teach conflict resolution. I moved over into reconciliation and conflict resolution studies. And I started to ask my students this question. If you said, what's the one phrase you've said in the classroom more than any others for 25 years, it'd be more like actually 17 or so, it would be this question: is it possible to passionately argue for truth and yet do so in ways that leave others feeling respected and taken seriously? That was sort of the experiment of the courses as they evolved. Is it possible to passionately argue for truth and yet do so in ways that leave others feeling respected and taken seriously? And I told them at one point, this is a little outdated. Sorry if this doesn't reach you because of its outdated nature. But I told my students, in some ways, I really want you to be like Rush Limbaugh. And in some ways, I really, really want you to be very much unlike Rush Limbaugh. And I said, at one level, Rush Limbaugh believes that truth can be known and we have an obligation to present it to a public and a society. And I said, that kind of passion for the truth is important. I said, but clearly he doesn't do so in a way that leaves the others feeling respected and taken seriously. So very few people that don't agree with him actually listen to what he has to say. I said, is it possible ever to bring those two together? Well, I was going along, and I was teaching that for a number of years. The students were writing everything down, and I had what I consider sort of a Charlie Brown educational crisis. I started to literally feel like I'm up here just talking, and they're just writing anything down. I'm up here going, wah, wah, wah. If you've seen the Charlie Brown, wah, 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 wah. And I remember I walked out of a particular class one day, and I thought, I have no idea if they really believe this. So I went back to my office, did some research, made a bunch of calls, and I set something up, and I was so excited. I came back in class the next day, and I said, well, next week on Wednesday, I think it was, we're going to have a 3-hour class. Normally the class was 2 hours, and then it was a Christian college. They had chapel after that. I said, I got you out of chapel. We're going to meet for 3 hours. And we have 5 guests coming to class to join us to talk. And I said, you may remember I gave an issues chart out the first day of class where I said, what do you believe as a class individually? And then I tallied them about certain social issues. And in that class, the issue itself is not critical here. It's a critical issue, but it's not critical to this. In that particular class, 32 out of 32 students, the only thing they seemed to agree upon of all the issues on the chart, thought that homosexuality was an immoral choice for a believer. All right, so I looked at the chart, I saw that, I made my calls. I said, so here's what's going to happen. You have 5 guests coming to class in a few days, and there's 2 things true about them. 1, they are passionate Christ followers, and 2, they are committed homosexual in a homosexual relationship. And we're going to find out if you really believe it's possible to passionately argue for truth and yet do so in ways that leave others feeling respected and taken seriously. And I got to tell you, for that time from when I announced the assignment to when the class began, I'm thinking, man, I'm the man. Teacher of the year is mine. What an assignment. Wow. And then, for some reason, I can remember it so well, that morning of the class, I thought, this may be the worst idea in the history of bad ideas. It just takes one of my students, one of my 32 students, to stand up with a big black Bible and start beating our guest over the head, and we will put back the cause of Christ for years. And I thought, if I could have right then just stopped the assignment, I would have done it. Because I thought, it's not me playing devil's advocate anymore. This is real human beings that we're talking about. And so we got to class. You could tell there was a bit of nervousness. And I explained that sort of the social experiment, that we believe that truth can be known and that we should present it in society, but we have to find ways to do it in ways that leave others feeling respected and taken seriously. That's why we're here today. I said, that's basically all I'm going to say. Here we go. It was a big circle. I remember my deodorant was not working at all. I was messed up. And so...
I'm sweating right now.
Yeah.
It's not working either.
So I said, so someone get us started. And there was that awkward silence that you'll have and things like that. And suddenly one of my students, Jed Medifin was his name, he raised his hand. I remember that because you weren't supposed to raise hands. He raised his hand and he said, can I ask you a question? What is it that anti-homosexual rights advocates argue that hurts you the most, that wounds you the most? And I thought that's a great start to our discussion. So for 3 hours we were off. Certainly had plenty of passion, both sides saying, different things. One of our guests had a PhD in Old Testament, and it was quite interesting to see some of my students throwing out Old Testament verses they hadn't thought through very carefully. He'd go, really? So that's true of today too? Yeah, of course it's true for today. Could you read down 2 more verses after that? Oh, sure. It says, if you talk back to your parents, you shall be stoned. So you're going to just take all of this and keep all of it was interesting to see the exchange back and forth. I also thought the students were doing an extraordinary job of trying to be respectful and trying to communicate. We take you seriously and your life and your world seriously. But I kept thinking, I'm not my guest. I don't know what this must be like to be in a room with 32 people who feel this way. So at the end of the time, David, the gentleman from the PhD in Old Testament, came up to me and said, Mike, I don't quite know how to process the last 3 hours. And I honestly had no idea what he meant by that. And this is what he said. Here it was. You asked what was my most memorable moment. Here it is. He said, for the last 3 hours, your students have said that I've made a wrong lifestyle choice. And he says, I'm used to that. Ever since I came out of the closet, the church has been telling me that. But then David said, but for the first time in my life, I don't feel beat up by that process. And I don't know what to do with that feeling. And what I'm fairly certain, because Dave and I actually began a friendship after that and talked about it quite a bit, is David, like most of us, didn't realize people can have viewpoints that they want to share with you that may be in opposition, but do so in extraordinarily respectful ways. Ways that say, your humanity and your story matter to me. And have humility about what we hold and what we believe. And that started it. That started it. And so I've got other things that happened since then, but that's sort of the story anyway, how it got going. So.
Wow. All right. So, well, tell what has happened since then. Any other crazy assignments?
Yeah, that's actually, yes. And one's hot off the press. One happened at Wheaton College 2 weeks ago. I think we were going to talk about this, but one of the things that I share with my class is I would argue that Christians traditionally can be among the worst listeners on earth. Mm-hmm. And I would argue that because we have a true source. We think everyone needs to hear our true source. And so if they don't believe our true source, they must be wrong. All may or may not be true, but let's just say for now it's true. But because of that, we're not terribly interested in listening to others. I don't think until 2 weeks ago, as much as I've been teaching this for 15 years, I really appreciated what this looked like. Because a new assignment I put into play, it's a revision of an old assignment, was this. It's called the Story Lunch. Okay. And it was small groups of students had to meet with people that they don't normally spend time with, simply to hear their story. It was not a time to debate. It was not a time to argue. It was simply to hear their story. That would be the first step. Maybe a relationship would develop from that, but at least to give them the gift of true empathetic listening. The first thing was my students admitted they don't spend any time with people that don't agree with them on issues. And that I would say in the church we're pretty good about that. If we're conservative politically, we tend to spend time watching certain television stations and listening to certain people. And if we're liberal, we tend to spend time with people like that. And so my students got together with, some met with small groups of Muslims, some from the Universalist Church, some with the agnostics from the Humanist Society of DuPage County, some with Mormons, and if they happened to think this was an issue that they all felt strongly about, some met with some gay Christians from an alumni group from Wheaton College called One Wheaton. That's a group of alumni, gay and lesbian alumni. And so they met with students from there. I'm mad to this day that when they came and reported their stories that I did not tape that. Because as incredibly basic as it sounds, the things they were saying, it changed them, and it changed me in ways that I really didn't fully appreciate. I'm just going to, if I just can quote, I wrote down the thing. One of them, or this is what I noticed, every single group thought we had an agenda, that we were going to listen to them, and then we're going to get them. The Mormon said, okay, now what happens? So now it's your turn. Now your turn to go, after us. One Wheaton, the gay and lesbian group said, come on now. You're just not supposed. We know at the end of this you're going to have something you're going to need to say to us. No, we're here to hear your story. And they were blown away. This is my students' words, not mine. Blown away that Christians would actually simply want to listen to someone's story, and I think that's tragic. I think the idea that people that disagree with us can't believe. In fact, some other quotes that they said. Wow, I didn't know, this is one of the guests, I didn't know that Christians could actually be quiet long enough to really listen to anyone else. One of them said, I'm blown away that you wanted to hear our story without disagreement or interruption. Seriously, I am blown away. One of my students said, I will never look at or think of Muslims the same way again. I realize I looked at them as stereotypes, but now for the first time in my life, they were human beings just like me with joys and struggles and doubts and passion for their faith. This group told a story of they got to watch, they got to sit in the back during one of the prayer times for the Muslim group. And the Muslims were talking about how meaningful prayer was to them. And my students said, I guess I would have known that their faith was important to them, but I never really understood it until this moment. And that was an incredibly powerful thing. And I could go on and on in terms of some of the conversations. I mean, I got an end game here, John. The end game is I think churches should be doing story lunches all the time. I think we should be intentionally engaging in people that aren't like us and say, no agenda, no agenda. My agenda is, can I hear your story? Can I hear your story? Because my students, the number of them that said, I just had a paradigm shift through one assignment was very cool. I mean, a teacher wants to hear that. And for a lot of them, it was a paradigm shift.
Okay, so here's what we're going to do. Turn back, table, conversation, process this as a table. How are you taking this, everything? He just said we're going to pull the question up on the screen. Which relationship in your life right now is struggling the most due to your inability to passionately argue for truth and yet do so in ways that leaves others feeling respected and taken seriously? Maybe you can't name a relationship that's struggling the most. So then just kind of give a little bit of a synopsis to those around you at the table of hearing all this, story lunches and so on. How does that strike you? What questions even come to mind? So that's the conversation. Remember, those of you that were here last time, you're going to get a chance as a table to ask one burning question at the end of the night to this guy. All right, so that's called in the hot seats. That's going to happen at the very end of the night. So if you really have that question, kind of jot that down. Hopefully you can get that answered by the end of the night. All right, take a few minutes as a table, discuss. All right, we are going to continue. We're going to continue. I'm sure you want to continue talking about that for sure. Again, we'll be hanging out once we're done here in a little bit, and we'll be happy to talk more about it. All right. Okay. All right, so at the top of the night, I shared with you the purpose of Mission U, which is all around this live part of, how can we be better equipped? How can we be, set up more to live a life of impact and influence in the workplace, on our street, at school, and so on. That's really the point of being here tonight, to set us up, to equip us even more towards that. And, certainly around Easter and just the way God's wired me up, I think about friends of mine, guys on my softball team, neighbors of mine that, through them sharing with me, are not following Jesus any way, shape, or form. And so what I want us to do, I want you to give us 3 or 4 more minutes on when I'm thinking about this through the lens of these guys on my team, guys on my street, I'm sitting around my fire pit, as I do a lot, the role that listening plays in truly loving these guys and helping the love of God be tangible in their life. Give us 4 more minutes on listening about that. Does that make sense?
Sure. One of the other phrases I heard somebody say once that has governed a lot of what I've thought about since then. He came into it was a Christian college class. I was actually sitting in the back just listening. And he sat there and he got up there and he said, you guys ever realize that you're the most unlikely people on earth to change the world? Well, you know, nobody in college wants to hear that phrase, right? And he said, yeah, you really are the most unlikely people on earth to change the world. He says, because he said, I would argue that change never takes place without the presence of two things, risk and sacrifice. He says, risk and sacrifice are always part of everything that changes good in this world. And he said, we American, predominantly middle to upper middle class evangelicals, we really value safety and comfort. And safety and comfort and risk and sacrifices don't go together. So therefore, he said, you're the most unlikely people to change the world. And we try to unpack that a lot in the class of what that looks like when we are having conversations. Is there supposed to be a notion, and I'm going to get a little controversial in a moment. If you find it controversial, I hope you won't just remember that and forget everything else. What does it mean in our conversations to have risk and sacrifice? And so one of the things we talk about is this. Everyone in here, I'm sure, believes in the golden rule. That's a good idea. I don't think we'd have a debate about that. And the golden rule is to guide our actions, and so one of our actions is listening. So I ask my students, or if in the longer seminar, I say, so the golden rule is do unto others as you have them do to you. So what ideally do you want when you are having a conversation with somebody else? What do you want from them when they're listening to you? And here it is. So if you don't like this, this is also most controversial in my classes as well. Eventually somebody says, well,
And I'll give you Mike's personal email if you really don't
please.
like this
Please,
part.
yes.
Shoot it straight to him. Yeah.
It says, I want them to consider the possibility that I am right and they are wrong. I said, well, that's what you want? They say, yeah. So then I ask them this. Do we owe that to those that hold non-Christian viewpoints? Now, for what it's worth, my answer is yes, we do. My answer is if we expect from them that behavior, we owe them the same kind of listening stance. And my experience has been, when I'm sometimes able to do that, is actually I often come out even more committed to my faith perspective because I realize God proved himself true all over again. But it's a risky thing. So all students go, wait, you're telling me I'm talking to an agnostic and I'm supposed to seriously consider the possibility that they are right and I'm wrong? And I said, yes, you should. That's the risk part of listening relationships. And they said, well, no, Jesus didn't do that. And we have a lot of talk about what would Jesus do and how it relates to us and things like that. But just in the assertion mode of this, maybe that'll come in the hot seat questions in a moment, I think that's the risk part of the kind of relationship we're supposed to do. And I think that's what earns us the right to be heard. When you take the time to listen to someone without any agenda, and you take the time to say, I'm taking you seriously, and I'm seriously believing what you had to say. Our Mormon friends, they said, we don't think anyone's ever come here, actually asked us what we believed. We go there all the time. We've been at your house probably 50 times, they said. But somebody coming to us, couldn't believe it. And you didn't have a rebuttal after we were done. You just simply listened to us. I think we're called to be golden rule listeners. I really do. And I think that's risky. But I think it's a risk we're supposed to take if we want the same behavior from them. And I think that earns us the right maybe one day to be heard. But I want to conclude with this. My story lunches with my students. Some of them said, well, this is great because then maybe I'll get a relationship with the Muslims and then we'll talk one day and I'll get to share faith with them. Maybe. But just so you know where I'm coming from, I would argue even if that never happens, you did the right thing. Even if the only thing you ever did is invite someone to tell their story, you're changing the very idea of the way they think about us, and you're changing the way they think about you. And you're giving them an enormous gift. Think about it. How many people actually really sit down and listen to us with total attention and raptured by what we have to say? And so, great. If that leads to a relationship, great. But that's not the only end game here, I would argue. Even from an evangelistic standpoint, I would argue that you're doing kingdom work if you simply listen and you never have another chance to have conversation again, for what it's worth.
All right, so here's what we're going to do. 5 minutes, pick someone around your table that you are going to be committed to for the next 30 days, and here's what I mean by that. That you're going to talk to each other, text each other, call each other in the next 30 days, because here's the challenge that I want to lay out before us. Here's a challenge of risk and sacrifice, and this is going to connect both conversations tonight. It's going to connect the relational conflict conversation we had earlier with a spouse, a roommate, coworker, whatever that might be, brother, or so on. And it's going to connect this conversation we just got done having, which is how do we be in relationship with someone that we radically disagree with? So here's the challenge. What is one courageous step you can take in the next 30 days to love this person through listening? Share what you will do and when you will do it. I heard from a number of people from last Mission U, this challenge part that we end with is like the game changer. This is when we take it from theory and conversation and we put it into action. All right, so I want to challenge us to do this. And some of you, all right, you can just say, I'm not ready to do that challenge. All right, we totally respect that. That's okay. You can sit this one out. But is there someone around the table, as you guys have been talking, that you say, all right, for the next 30 days, let's walk together, let's text each other, email, whatever it takes to encourage each other to really put this conversation into action on how we can take a courageous step to really listen to someone that we're in conflict with or that we really disagree with. All right? Take 5 minutes, and then when you're done with that, you need to identify the burning question that your table has, and my guess is you have a few of those, and Tommy will collect those. All right? The mission, you in the hot seat, we're going to try to be really concise, all right? You guys, I mean, we have a bunch of questions here. We're going to try to be concise. The answers may not be totally thorough, but I just asked Mike if he would help me over the next week and a half or so to, in a very thorough way, answer all these questions that just came in, and we'll post them all on the wire. Does that sound good? All right. So, and I may have some other people help me answer them as well, so it's going to be fun. We will definitely answer these thoroughly on wire within the next couple weeks in our spare time. And it's Easter, and we have nothing but time right now, so that's good. All right, first question. Is there, all right, reset, start. Too late, I'm sorry, this is great. Is there, this is my question, and I got the mic, so I'm going to ask it first. Is there, sorry, I'm dying to ask it. Is there a maturity level necessary to say, okay, I'm just going to consider that they could be totally right? If I have said yes to Jesus and I'm a Christian for 1 week, is that a good idea?
Good question. I think there is process involved.
Is that an okay question? Anyone else? No, answer that question.
Yeah, well, I will. I'll do you said concise, the short version of that.
That's right.
On the one hand, I'd say definitely. I think, the metaphor, we wouldn't, I think we mentioned it once before, we wouldn't put our 3-year-old behind the wheel of a car because they're not prepared to drive. We have to understand what people are prepared for, not to do, and prepared to do. Having said that, okay, I think that one of the tenets that we should, I remember back when I took, I'll go different. When I remember I took a class on cults, and while we tend to think of cults as doing this,
like Indianapolis Colts?
No, on C-U-L-T-S.
Oh, okay, quite different.
And I think if I were to define what a cult is, I think it is a group that becomes self-insulated to the point where they have no outside impact, outside involvement at all, and to the point where I remember when I was talking to people that came to my front door, and I said, well, I got a great idea, I've got a couple books I'd love you to read. I'm sure you got 50 books you want me to read. I'll read those 50, you read a couple for me, and we'll get back and discuss them. Oh, I won't do that. Why won't you do that? Well, because I don't read what's not true. And, well, but I'll read your books, and I think you're currently not true. And he said, well, Jesus didn't read, about why he may not be the Son of God. And I think one of the benchmarks of cultish behavior anyway is completely inoculating yourself from any outside influence at all. And I think that's not terribly healthy. So at another level, I think when possible, letting know we're comfortable with the fact that there's other ideas out there, but we think that Christianity stands up to scrutiny. Christianity stands up, the Christian story stands up to examination. So yes and no, I would say.
Okay, all right, next question. How do you do? He did pretty good with that one. All right. What do you do if the other person refuses to engage? And this is what the 5 steps you shared, when the 5 steps just aren't getting it done.
Well, if you were in the 15-week version or the 4-hour version, either one of the things we talk about is that reconciliation almost always takes time. And we're in a culture that doesn't like that. We want to win our stuff right away. Jacob and Esau, if you know the story in the Old Testament about Jacob and Esau and the brothers and estrangement and then eventually reconciliation. I believe that the number was 57 years was between when they became estranged from one another to when they reconciled. And so sometimes simply the fact that we talk a lot in the Christian language about sowing seeds. When it comes to this kind of thing, sometimes the seed you're sowing is, I just took you seriously. And you still think I'm an idiot and you want nothing else to do with me, but eventually you'll know that I took you seriously, and that may lead to something else. So I think the first answer to that is nothing. And the second answer is it's risky, and risk could go the wrong way. Les Mis, what if Les Mis would have started by Jean Valjean taking all the stuff and go out and buying alcohol? Would we say that the Monsignor's act was wrong? No, it was still the right thing to do. Whether or not they responded properly or not, whether or not Jean Valjean responded properly or not, it was the right thing to do to show him extraordinary grace in that situation. So whether they listen to you or not is not, you're called to be faithful. And whether they respond properly or not is not really your responsibility.
Okay, next question. If you're only listening, how do you argue for truth?
Here we go. Cliche alert. Here it is. Seek first to understand and then to be understood. I think eventually there's going to become a time, I think, and it's okay, am I allowed to talk about you? Is that okay?
Talk about me?
Yeah.
Please,
yeah.
yes.
I love what I've heard when we visited and you talked about your fire pit discussions out there. And it sounded like for long periods of time, nothing about faith other than faith and the Cubs finally, breaking their streak or something ever come up.
Go easy.
But I know. Be careful. But the fact is, once someone is convinced that we are agenda-free here, that we have given them this gift of really taking them seriously and listening to them, I think process that often leads to the next step. Yeah. Now, that's why I think this, don't get me wrong, obviously the other side of the story lunches, I would hope that some of those would lead to relationships. Because let's be honest with each other here. I mean, most of us in this room, we believe evangelical Christian faith is true and Mormonism is untrue. We believe that the Universalist church is not right. I mean, so remember, it was passionately argue for truth and yet do so in ways that leave others feeling respected and taken seriously. Where this has evolved from, though, is I think most of the non-Christian world, at least in the Western culture, is so convinced we're not good at the first part, they're not interested in what we have to say on the other part. And so I think that's why it's so critical that we start developing a culture that says, look, we take you seriously. If you're the only person on earth, Christ would have died for you. I mean, if you want to put it in Christian language, this person matters to God, and so they should matter, and their story should matter to us.
Next question. When and how do you start standing for the truth?
Similar question, I think, in what we just had. And it depends, of course, whether you have a relationship or not. When I want to really get depressed, which is not very often, but when I want to, I go to the USA Today online newspaper. You might want to try this sometime. Find a controversial article and read the letters to the editor by the articles on those. And there's certainly people standing for truth there, but nobody is listening. Because here's the great thing about this. Most of what I've said tonight, again, this is my first time doing this in such a short version, is about the morality of listening, because you're supposed to. But what's really cool about this is that often leads people to want to listen to you. And so if we're talking about in a relationship, I think that's pretty critical. That we give them first the fact that we're listening to them, and then eventually, hopefully, we lead to the second part. Now, sometimes you're in a situation where that's not possible. You're at a school board meeting, and you're making a vote that night. As you make your statements, and this is where the class gets really practical, at least when I do it in the class version, what are some actual phrases you can say to let everybody know while I'm about to make an argument for truth, I'm taking the other side seriously. So you got to take a stand there, and we try. This is how practical it gets. I tell the students, don't use the word but. Just, you English teachers in the audience, you're going to hate this, but say yes and instead of the word but. But tell someone that to get defensive because you're going to attack what they had to say. Just say yes and. I mean, that's how practical we get. Trying to say, we listened to the other side, we took you seriously. And here's another perspective we feel strongly is there.
Next question. Whom have you disliked the most? Why? How have you learned to love him or her?
Okay, I'm not supposed to be succinct, so I'll be really quick. I have to go back. When I realized I just started teaching this stuff when I realized that I hated my father. My father was physically abusive and he was emotionally abusive, and that I actually not only didn't love him, I hated him. And would you believe it or not, it was a class that called me out on it. The class said, you talk about people and the resistance they hold can change. How about your dad you mentioned a couple of times? I hate it when students put your stuff back on you. And part of what we talk about in the class is, what if you have no desire to forgive? What if you have no desire to love somebody? Because we all know what that's like, and so we unpack that a little bit. But in that particular story, I became convinced that I had to try to communicate to my dad. This is before, obviously before he passed away. I had to communicate to him that I wanted to take him seriously in his world. So if I can venture a quick story, we went back out to California where he lived, and I hate to hunt, have no interest in hunting, and he loves to hunt, and so...
As do I.
Yes, yeah, but I'm a Christian, so I don't. And anyway, so...
Yes, and.
Yes, and...
Yes, and.
So
we can take.
So he
take
takes me duck hunting, and
yes,
in the San Joaquin Valley, there's these big man-made irrigation rivers or canals, whatever they call them. And so one of us is supposed to walk with the gun. We see the duck way up there and we're supposed to walk up, and we're supposed to stay low. And then when we were even with the duck, the other one would flash the lights, and we're supposed to come over and shoot the duck. So it was my turn, and I was walking and walking, seemed like forever. And finally, he flashed me, and I snuck up, and I saw what I thought was the biggest duck I'd ever seen in my life. And I got up and I shot him, and I was successful. It was so great. And he comes driving up the truck, and I looked at him, and I thought, well, this is a great bonding chance to start, getting to know each other a little bit. And I said, Dad, is that not the biggest duck you ever saw? And it was one of the only times my dad and I ever laughed together. He said, son, we got to get the hell out of here. You just killed a snow goose, which is a protected species. No. So it was not a good moment. I thought it was a duck. I mean, it was a big duck.
You've been in the classroom way too long.
I have.
I mean, just watching Duck Dynasty, you would know not to do that.
I tell you that story to say that there was no happy ending with my dad. While I believe people in the position they hold can change, I also understand that human behavior and all the baggage that comes with it isn't every one of these stories isn't going to be a happy story. But I do believe that we are called to try to believe that things can move those directions. This one didn't have a happy ending, but many others do.
This is kind of connected to it, but I want to ask you anyway. Does every conflict need a resolution?
Does it need a resolution? As much as we're told, as much as is possible, live at peace with all men. So to that degree, blessed are the peacemakers, for those we call the children of God. To that degree, I guess I would say yes. The problem is that there are some issues that someone asked me in my class, for example, how would you reconcile with Osama bin Laden? And what I argue, there are some issues that are so heinous to basic human decency that the call to be at peace with that individual or to be reconciled is not a moral responsibility. The problem is we think that group is much bigger than it really is. I mean, I remind my students all the time, if you're pro-life, there are plenty of thoughtful, caring, moral Christians who believe the other side. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't say anything, but it does mean you should recognize you can be thoughtful, moral, caring, and believers and believe the other side. On the homeless, I mean, as you know what the Gallup poll said, name the first thing you think of when you think of evangelical Christians. Most of you have probably heard this. I think I might even heard you say it. It's anti-gay and pro-life. While those are important issues, the fact that those are the first things people think of us because we put those in the Osama bin Laden category. And while they are important issues, I don't think they belong there. And so people see us as in terms of just two issues like that.
Next question. How do you ensure you don't push your views on someone you are in conflict with?
The reason that's a big question is there's my wife and I, and there's me and the atheist. Me and those are very different kind of conflicts. At the end of the day, I'll go back to where I started. I think at the end of the day, we are called to do both things. We are called to understand truth as God makes it clear to us, as clear as it can be. And we're called to, if pro-lifers are right, then we're killing people by the millions. If pro-choice advocates are right, we're setting women's rights back perhaps hundreds of years. Both sides, there's true moral issues going on, and they have an obligation to share those viewpoints. This is just all about process of when and where. That's what it's about. And it's about earning the right to be heard. How do we earn the right for people to listen to us? And I think it's agenda-free listening to others. That's what I'm suggesting. So with my wife, of course, we have a lot longer relationship and in terms of what that looks like. And there I hope that we have, I would say every conflict eventually has to be resolved between my wife and I. But that could be, we'd have to define conflict. We have very difference of agreement. I mean, I watch The Walking Dead and love it, and she thinks I'm an absolutely weirdo for watching that show. She'll come by and someone will kill 5 zombies, and she'll just go, I don't get you at all.
And nor do I.
Yeah, okay.
All right, let me ask you this. You've been married, how long have you guys been married again?
31 years.
Yeah, 31 years. I thought it was in the 30s. Yeah, hey, there you go. In light of some of the things we've talked about tonight, what has been maybe the single most effective thing to be married for 31 years?
If I'm going to be forced to choose one, it's got to be our ever-growing attempt to try to separate the moment of conflict from the actual response. It's the 2-week thing. It's a 20-minute thing.
The balcony.
Yeah. I'm an ex-debate coach, so I think I'm right about a lot of stuff. And shockingly, she thinks she's right about a lot of stuff, too. I don't know why. When she's married to me, she should know that I'm right about a lot of stuff.
Right.
But it's incredible to me. This is real stuff. This isn't some, theory stuff. How many times I'll want to say something, and I wait 20 minutes, and I have no interest in saying it anymore. And that at the end of the day, that has helped us. We actually, maybe to prepare for tonight, we had a little argument before I came over here.
It's always that way.
Yeah, and
for other people.
For other people. Yeah. Me too. It was our first in 7 years. So it was, but. If you would have heard this and then you would have had a video of that, you said, oh, look at him, he's saying the words, help me understand. But we mean them in our vocabulary. I really want to understand why this makes sense from her perspective. Yeah. And I think she wants the same for us. Yeah. Now, obviously, if this is a list of 5 things to do and then you're just perfect from there wouldn't be any reason for any conflict discussion. We have plenty of conflicts that don't end well and take a long time. But I'd say that's our thing we've probably tried the most at. 2
more questions, then we're gonna pray and wrap up. Favorite or best book on the subject of conflict or argumentation?
Do any of you remember the Office episode when Michael Scott starts talking about conflict resolution techniques? It's really bad. It was with the babies that played the instruments on that maybe not. Guess you had to be there. The problem was he was actually quoting really good stuff. The man, every discipline has the woman or the man, and the man in this field is a man by the name of Urey. He's from Harvard. He's championed the Harvard Negotiation Project, and he's written 2 books. He written the same book, but he changed the name so he could sell a lot more books. It's Getting to Yes and Getting Past No. I actually use Getting Past No in my class, and it is painfully practical about how to do negotiations better. He gives some great stories. My favorite, he talks about Steven Spielberg being picked on by this big bully when he was in school. So to get this big bully to sort of step to his side, he told the guy, he said, hey, I'm making a movie about Nazis. Steven Spielberg was actually making movies when he was in junior high, local movies. And he said, I'm making a movie about Nazis. I want you to be the head Nazi. And now they became best buddies after that. So he gives a lot of practical ways to do that. So I think...
What's his name, the author?
Urey.
He was at the Global Leadership Summit.
Yes, he was. Yes.
Pastor.
Getting to Yes is his most famous book. Getting Past No is the book that I think is a little updated and works best.
All right, last one. Mission Church will truly impact the 10 if we put blank into practice.
I have to believe if out there in the 10 it starts to be known, this place unapologetically believes what they believe, but they also unapologetically are captivated by what I believe in my story. I think that's just so unique among churches that I gotta believe that that's gonna lead to the very things that we all want to happen. I mean, if you were known that way, if you were known as a church, I always had this dream, what if, big issues in the 10, I'm applying it to the 10, it wasn't necessarily the 10. What if when there was a big school board issue, but you wanted to bring people to talk in ways that really showed respect to each other, they came to Mission to do that? How cool would that be? They knew this is a place where people have safe conversations about issues they're passionate about. I just have to believe that would be a way to earn the right to be heard by those who don't share your views.
Awesome. Well, we got some that we didn't get to, and we'll answer those on Mission Wire. Let me pray for us tonight, and then we'll have a chance to thank Mike. God, thank you so much for this journey that all of us are on, and a lot of different things were said tonight, and we just pray right now in the power of the Holy Spirit that you would help us remember and really take to heart the things that you want us to remember and take to heart. God, we pray that we would become a church that is incredible at listening, that we would become a church and a people that value the stories of other people, people that disagree and believe different things than us. God, may we be that kind of church. So God, I ask for that, God, and we thank you for Mike. God, we thank you for him giving tonight to come and hang out with us. God, we thank you for the different things that you said through him and to us. And God, lastly, we thank you for Medina Baptist Church, that they would open up their space to us like this again. And we ask that you would bless them tremendously in the coming weeks and years. God, thank you for Mission U. We pray that you would continue to use this to equip us and send us now on mission. Help us and increase our influence and impact in our workplace and on our streets and in our schools. God, we love you, and we pray this, Jesus, in your name. Amen. Let's thank Mike for being here.